Disclaimer. With the power of J.K. Rowling, I summon a new chapter. Day 44. Hermione stood unsteadily on her feet outside Shell Cottage. Once, this had been meant to be Bill's and Fleur's seaside summer home. Now it was a refuge for Fleur, Molly, and baby Nadia, almost completely cut off from the outside world. She'd had Dobby bring her by sight-along apparition. Even if it was an emergency procedure, he was in better condition to do it than she was. Right now, she didn't fully trust herself not to splinch herself, even if she knew how to get there. It took an effort not to stumble as she made her way up to the door. She was not at her best today. She knocked uncertainly, to no response. She knocked again, a little too loud this time, and moments later she heard a thump on the other side.
"Who's there?"
Molly called.
"It's Hermione, Molly. The password is Schindler."
The door opened a crack and Molly's face peered out. Then it opened wide enough to see all of her.
"Hermione, what are you doing here?"
she asked.
"Is something wrong?" "We're all fine. I'm making progress, in fact, but I need to talk to Fleur." "To Fleur?"
Molly stopped when she got a good look at her.
"Are you all right, Hermione? You look more exhausted than Fleur does."
It took her a moment to respond.
I haven't been sleeping well," she answered. "Well, come on in, then. Fleur," she called.
Hermione sat at the kitchen table, and Fleur soon walked into the room carrying Nadia in her arms. She had dark circles around her eyes and looked about as run down as a part Vila was probably capable of looking, but she still moved with grace and steadiness. Hermione felt a twinge of jealousy.
"Hermione," Fleur said with a yawn, "what are you doing here?" "I needed to talk to you," Hermione said. "It's about the ritual I'm working on."
Fleur narrowed her eyes.
"The ritual?"
She casually handed Nadia off to Molly.
"My secret project. The one I was working on for Harry. It's a ritual. Didn't I mention that?" "No, you did not." "Oh, sorry. Well, anyway, I've worked out most of what I needed. I just needed to come to you for one of the ingredients."
Fleur nodded, and then, lightning fast, she drew her wand, and the next thing Hermione knew she was bound to her chair and backed against the wall.
"Ah, Fleur!" "You are not Hermione," she said. "Did you think I would fall for that?" "No, Fleur, I am." "You come here talking of rituals?" "No, no, oh no, I didn't need your firstborn, Fleur. I need a glass of milk."
Fleur paused in confusion.
"Excuse me?" "Ugh, I'm too tired for this. Breast milk. One of the ingredients is breast milk. It's not a sacrifice either, it's an offering."
Fleur tilted her head.
"What are you talking about?"
Hermione sighed. She strained against the ropes, and would have rubbed her temples if she could.
"Molly, could you—"
She stopped. Neither of them would want to leave Fleur alone with her.
"I don't want Nadia to hear this." "You mean you do not want Molly to hear this?" Fleur said. "Who are you, really?" "She knew the password, Fleur," Molly said softly. "That proves nothing, Molly." "This is Shell Cottage," Hermione grumbled. "It's under Fidelis. Remus is the secret keeper. I came here with Dobby. You know him, too. Arithmancy. The geometric structure defining the global ley line network comprises the mirror planes of the isosahedral symmetry group." She stopped in mid-sentence. "Now, there's a thought. Fleur, are there any major ley line intersections in the world whose coordinates can be narrowed down precisely?"
Fleur sighed and lowered her wand, though only partly.
"Very well. You are definitely the Hermione I know," she conceded. "But still you sound confounded. Perhaps imperious." "You know I can resist the imperious curse," Hermione said. "And I sound confounded because I'm probably getting less sleep than you right now." "Excuse-moi, I am caring for an infant, you know." "And I'm up at all hours trying to save Harry's life." "What?" Molly gasped. Hermione winced. "Oh, sorry. I forgot you didn't know. I don't think it'll be a problem, Molly, honest. But this really isn't something for you to hear. I wouldn't even be telling Fleur unless I had to." "Bill knew, didn't he?" Fleur asked quietly. "Yes, he did," Hermione said. Harry and I asked him not to tell you. It wasn't personal. It's just that we wanted to tell as few people as possible."
Flora sat down at the table. She looked unhappy, but the tension drained out of her.
"Molly, please take Nadia back upstairs," she said. "I wish to talk to Hermione in private."
Molly looked between the pair of them nervously, but she accepted the arrangement.
"All right, then,"
she said, and she left the room with the baby.
"Merci,"
Fleur called before turning back to Hermione.
"So, rituals?" "It's to remove Horcruxes,"
Hermione said before she caught herself.
"I mean, not the way you're thinking. That's already sorted. You know about the Horcruxes, but what you don't know is that Harry is a Horcrux."
Fleur gasped and swore colorfully in Siberian. That must have really rattled her. She must have been glad she sent Nadia away now. Hermione just stared down at the table.
"How did this happen?" she demanded. "When you know who tried to kill Harry the first time, the recoil broke a piece of his soul off, and it latched onto Harry. He's not a real Horcrux, but it will still take a ritual to remove." "But you cannot remove a Horcrux without destroying the vessel, even if he is not a real one." "There are ways around that," Hermione said. "I just need to take a snake and some opposing elements to drive it out of him. I'm sorry I'm not explaining this well." "You really must be tired," Fleur said. "I still do not understand what you are doing." "Do you know much about ritual craft, Fleur?" "Only a little. Cursebreakers need to know the basics."
Hermione took a deep breath to try to collect her thoughts.
"I need to find all chemically opposing elements to the Horcrux ritual to remove the soul piece from Harry. One of those elements involves drinking the blood of a live snake. Now, that's consuming life, with a dark aspect, and it's symbolically taking on the alchemical properties of the Ouroboros. But now, the snake is the target, so it needs to be displaced in the equations." "Wait, the target?" "Of the ritual, to move the soul piece too. Anyway, since a serpent is used in a different aspect, I need to include an opposing element to the blood drinking, sustaining life instead of consuming it, and with a light aspect."
She looked up at Fleur, who was slowly processing her words.
"I'll save you the trouble. It's the milk of human kindness." "The milk of human kindness? I haven't heard of this phrase." "It's a Shakespeare reference, although I'm taking it a bit more literally. Human breast milk freely given. That's what I need for the ritual. And do you know the difference between a sacrifice and an offering?" "Yes, I know that much. An offering is merely giving some common thing you have. A sacrifice cannot be got back." "Right. Well, this is an offering. The snake is the only sacrifice."
She tilted her head, then shook it, ignoring the last part.
"I am not fully human, though," she said. "Doesn't matter. You can interbreed with humans. That makes you fully human to Muggle science."
Fleur stared at Hermione in silence for at least 2 solid minutes. She seemed to be considering her words, turning them over in her mind and analyzing them for herself. A range of emotions warred on her face. Finally her expression turned hard.
"Does Harry know what is required?"
Hermione shook her head.
"No, I haven't told him yet." "But you will need me there to participate?" "No," she said, confused, and then she blushed deeply when she understood what Fleur was saying. "No, it doesn't need to be straight from the source. It just needs to be freely given. I'm going to put it in a silver goblet."
"Ah!" Fleur relaxed, but she still stared at Hermione in silence for another minute. Finally she sighed and asked,
"How much will you need?" "Just what you would get from a normal feeding. I think that's about 4 ounces. I can make a nutritionally balanced infant formula to cover for it if you need it." "No, it is only 1 feeding. I will not need it." She waved her off. "When do you need it?" "I'll let you know. Soon, I hope. I've still got one more part of the ritual to figure out." "Fine."
Hermione sat quietly for a minute. Then, with nothing else to say, she stood to leave. She was nearly out the door when she stopped and turned around.
"Thank you, Fleur. I'm sorry to disturb you like this, but no, I see it is necessary. For Harry I will do it."
Hermione nodded awkwardly. Then she called out a thanks to Molly and left the cottage. Day 45.
"Unsupported flight," she muttered angrily to herself. "Unsupported flight. How is you know who doing that? I feel like I'm missing something obvious, but I don't know what."
She knew she needed to concentrate on the ritual. Unfortunately, focus was the one thing Hermione didn't have to save her life. She was still making a fair amount of progress, but she knew she could easily work twice as fast if she were on her game, which only increased her frustration.
"Come on, pay attention. Have to keep working on the ritual," she told herself.
She set her notes about you-know-who's flying aside, as much as she wanted to dig deeper into them, and went back to the exorcism ritual. She needed to find the opposing elements to several other parts of the Horcrux ritual. The murder was only the most obvious. The full procedure was quite gruesome. She hadn't even told Harry all of the steps described in Secrets of the Darkest Art. It was so awful.
"Self-mutilation," she said to herself, "and carving specific runes onto one's skin, but the self-mutilation is the important part. The opposing element should be healing or purification."
There were a number of directions she could go with that. The trouble was, most of them were either impossible without a trained healer present, completely clearing the skin of acne and other blemishes, for example, which was nigh impossible even for a wizard, or far too mundane to be a ritual act.
I don't think anointing with oil is going to work," she said to herself. "I need to think more abstract. The self-mutilation and carving of runes in blood is an act of steeping oneself in darkness. Runes aren't usually marked on the skin. That's unusual. It's an act of drawing the darkness into yourself. That suggests the opposing element should be anchoring oneself in light."
She paused.
"How do you anchor yourself in light?"
She snorted as a particularly disturbed thought came to her.
"I really do need a break," she said. "No, I can't just light him on fire. Okay, light and magic. But there's nothing special about magic light, is there? Not powerfully special? Or a magical kind of light?" "Oh, duh," Hermione said. "The only form of light that's magically distinctive is the Patronus charm. We just need to expose him to the Patronus charm during the ritual. I don't even think it'll matter who casts it. It'll help push the Horcrux away from him, and it should also serve as a guarding force against the ritual going wrong. It'll work. Good, now for the next part."
Day 46. Hermione stood in Diagon Alley, putting up posters with moving pictures of her burning house with the caption, "Crimes of the Death Eaters." She was proud of this campaign. After showing the destruction of the Rookery, showing the burning homes and mangled bodies of Muggle-born children to the wizards of Britain seemed the perfect way to foment revolution. The Aurors were in the alley, but they didn't see her because she had the Ring of Invisibility. They tried to tear down the posters, and she grinned wider. She had put a new enchantment on these ones. She called it the Hydra Curse. Every time the Aurors tore down one poster, 2 more would take its place. Suddenly, a voice shouted, "Revelio!" and her ring fell from her hand. A horrible cackling sound sounded behind her, and she turned around. It was her, Bellatrix, and Rookwood, and their master.
"You know who,"
Hermione snarled.
"Yes, Miss Granger," You-Know-Who said smugly. "I know who. This little campaign of yours has gone on long enough."
He waved his wand, and all the posters were torn down from the walls at once. But the curse worked just fine, as twice as many posters reappeared in their place. Hermione laughed.
"You'll have to do better than that," she called.
"Yes, a clever little charm," Rookwood said. You-Know-Who scowled.
"Perhaps so, but there is more than one way to skin a Kneazle. A little fire should take care of you and your lies."
Hermione gasped.
"No, don't!"
she yelled.
"Master, no!"
Rookwood shouted.
"No, my lord!"
Bellatrix cried.
"Silence, all of you!"
You-Know-Who said.
"Incendio!"
Hermione backed up in horror against the wall. There was nowhere to run. She tried to apparate away, but she couldn't. The fire began burning the posters. Each poster burned created 2 more, which only added more fuel to the fire.
"You lunatic!" she screamed. "You've killed us all!"
The posters turned into a fiery hurricane of burning parchment and razor-sharp edges. It swirled around You-Know-Who, growing all the time. A look of fear crossed his face.
"What magic is this?" he said. "Finite! Finite, I say!"
Bellatrix and Rookwood vanished. Hermione tried to cast the counter-curse, but it was tabooed. The swirl of burning parchment grew wider and denser, tearing into You-Know-Who's flesh. He tried to fight it off, but everything he did made it worse. "No, no, this cannot be!" he screamed. "I am invincible!" But all his spells failed. You know who died in a flurry of 1,000,000 burning paper cuts. Their victory was short-lived. The posters were still burning and multiplying. Hermione screamed as the hurricane of fire grew to engulf her. She gasped and bolted upright on her cot. She looked around, trying to make sense of her surroundings. The lamp was burning by her bedside. Her papers were strewn across her chest and the floor. The curtain that separated her from Ginny's side of the tent was undisturbed. It was daylight, though she wasn't sure of the time.
"Merlin, where did that come from?"
she breathed. She'd had a lot of nightmares in the past few weeks, but that one was just plain weird. She laughed at the absurdity of it when she went over it in her mind.
"As if you could make endlessly replicating posters like that,"
she said. Duplicated objects were conjured. They degraded with time and number of duplications. And fire.
"The only way to make a stable duplicate like that would be with runes."
And that was when she started to panic.
"Oh, no, 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 no!"
She scrambled to pick up her papers and pens, fumbling with her hands.
"No, no, 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 no!"
She stumbled out of the tent, getting out of the stuffy air. The others were already up and about, as usual, but she ignored them.
"No, no, no, no! It can't be!"
She transfigured 3 upright blackboards from rocks and started writing. "Hermione! Gah!" Whack! Ow!
"George? Oh, I'm sorry."
Hermione had accidentally smacked her arm against the side of George's head.
"Bloody hell, Hermione! What's wrong?"
he said. He sounded almost as scared as she did, seeing her.
"You look like someone died. Did someone die?"
She shook her head and shook him off to continue writing.
"Then what is it?" "It's bad, that's what it is."
"Is it you-know-who?" asked Harry.
No, or God, I hope not."
"Then what happened? I haven't seen you like this since—" He had to really think back. "Since Sturgis Podmore?" he guessed. "Hermione, stop and talk to us." George tried to pull her away again. She shook him off again.
"Not now, George. This is important."
"Is this about the ritual?" Harry asked. He could see what Hermione was writing. Runes, trigonometric equations, and geometric diagrams that didn't look like any of the projects she was working on. Hermione stared at Harry as if he'd asked if the sky was green.
"What? The ritual?"
she said.
"No, this is more important."
"What?" Ginny said.
"What do you mean it's more important? You said you were close with the ritual." "I am close. I can feel it. There's just 1 or 2 more blanks left to fill in. But this— George, stop it!"
she said as he held on to her. She tried to fight his grip, but he only held her tighter. "Not until you explain what's going on, Hermione," he said. "You look worse than usual. I'm not saying something."
"Damn it, George, I'm trying to save the world here."
"What?" they all said.
George! Your and Fred's decoy detonators. How do they work?"
Now it was his turn to look at her like she'd just asked if the sky was green. "The what's now?"
"How do they duplicate themselves?"
she snapped.
"I know they do. How do they make enough of themselves to cover a room?"
They just have a strong duplication charm on them," he said. "What are you talking about? Are you feeling all right?" He felt her forehead for a fever, but she slapped his hand away.
"Okay, good."
That was one less worry, although it hadn't been a great concern.
"Now, what if you used runes to set the spell, and each duplicate detonator had the same runes on it?"
George looked thoroughly confused by now, but he indulged her. The same thing. They'd duplicate until the runes ran out of power."
"Right. And what if the runes also pulled power from the ley lines?"
"Well, they'd run longer, but they'd still be conjured. They'd wear out pretty quickly."
"Yes, but what if they didn't conjure duplicates? What if they transfigured nearby objects into copies of themselves? What if it was a simpler design that's easier to transfigure? It's only the runes that matter, after all."
George furrowed his brow. "Is that even possible?"
"You tell me."
In runic terms, conjuring was easier than transfiguration. It took more intelligence to change a potential unknown input form instead of creating the output from thin air. But it wasn't a totally crazy proposition. George's eyebrows rose as he understood. "Well, they'd just keep turning everything into copies of themselves without stopping. Why would you do that?"
"I'm not going to do it!" she shouted. "I'm worried about some idiot who doesn't understand runes and exponential growth doing it by mistake. I'm worried about Rookwood thinking of the idea and making a doomsday device, or some other dark wizard who's less afraid for his own life. It doesn't have to be a decoy detonator, although it would have to be animated. Something as simple as a pair of scissors that hops around and cuts bits of things off to turn into more scissors could destroy the world if they multiply out of control."
"Hermione, that's completely mental!" Ginny spoke over her.
"It's not, Ginny. Muggles have been worried for years about that kind of thing happening if their robots got sophisticated enough. You've heard of that, haven't you, Harry?"
Harry stared at her like a deer in headlamps. "What, you mean like in the Terminator?" he said. Hermione sighed.
"That's a really crude example, but yes, Harry, like in the Terminator."
Ginny whirled on her boyfriend as horror began to replace the indignation on her face.
"Harry, you mean she's actually serious?"
"Whoa, easy, Gin. I only understood like half of what she said, but something that uses runes like that, I don't know, it might be possible."
"Now, wait a minute," George said. "Even if you did all that, wouldn't the runes still degrade with so much copying like any other duplication?" "They might," Hermione admitted. "That's one of the things I need to figure out, along with how much power they could pull from the ley lines and a bunch of other stuff. It's just that magic usually has rules to stop things like this from breaking everything, like not being able to transfigure radioactive material. But I can't see any here.
"Hermione, please stop," he said sternly, holding her by the shoulders. She did. "Take a deep breath." He waited until she did.
"You need to calm down and think rationally instead of taking off in a blind panic, okay?"
Part of Hermione wanted to snap at her boyfriend for treating her like a child. Thankfully, the rational part of her kicked in. Blind panic? Not good. She took another deep breath and nodded.
"Good," he said with a carefree grin. "Now, is Rookwood likely to actually use this mad scheme?"
Harry answered for her before she could speak. "No. If he's smart enough to figure this out, he's way too smart to actually use it."
"And what about everyone else?" he said. "We've gone hundreds of years without anyone destroying the world." "Decades, more like," Hermione interrupted. "Maybe as little as 20 years, since the principles have filtered into the magical world enough for serious runecrafters to be thinking about it."
George frowned a little, but he pressed on. "Fine. 20 years without anyone destroying the world. If it's even possible, which it might not be.
How likely is it for someone to do it in the next month, or even the next year? And remember, those runecrafters aren't you."
She lowered her gaze and shook her head.
"Not very likely," she muttered.
"Exactly. Look, Hermione, I'm not saying it's not important. Eventually. I'm just saying you have too much on your shoulders as it is, and this isn't something you need to worry about right now."
"Yeah, I guess," she admitted wearily. "I'll get back to the ritual then."
"I think maybe you should take a break."
"No, not now. I really am close. I'm just missing one important piece."
Day 47.
Come on,"
Hermione muttered to herself.
"This doesn't add up. There should be a powerful ritual force that actually severs the soul fragment away from Harry. The numbers add up, but I've moved the sacrifice to the receiving side. It's not in the right place to actually do it. But I don't see how I add another element important enough to do the cutting."
It was the one piece she'd missed when she figured out the snake sacrifice part of the exorcism ritual. In the Horcrux ritual, the most powerful element, the murder, was what split the soul. But here, the sacrifice was there to absorb the soul fragment. The rest of the ritual would pull Harry's own soul and the fragment apart, as if to opposing poles of a magnet. But the fragment wouldn't tear away from him by anything so mundane. To put it more technically, she had the topological transformations that would stretch the souls apart and make them easier to break, that would lower the energy of the fission operator, but she didn't know how to apply the fission operator itself. The best thing she'd come up with used sympathetic magic, which wasn't as impressive as it sounded in the real world. something to do with the binding or breaking of chains as a symbolic foil to the severing of the soul fragment, but she couldn't come up with anything significant enough to apply to such a powerful ritual. There was a rustling at the entrance of the tent, and a voice called out, "Knock, knock," but she was too engrossed in her figures to pay attention.
"Binding or breaking, which is it?" she whispered to herself.
"Hermione," the voice called again. It didn't help that she was getting lost in plus and minus signs. Too many of those, and even she started to lose track. Was the desired effect a freeing or a cutting off? Was the balancing act a chaining, something she probably couldn't do in a light ritual? Was it letting go of something valuable, like freeing a house elf? They didn't have any bound ones to use, if it was. "Hermione, I'm coming in if you don't answer. If you're not decent, you need to say so." The voice was finally too much for her to shut out.
"Huh? George, is that you?"
"Yes. Are you okay in there?"
"Fine,"
she said, and then, after half a minute,
"Come in."
George stepped into the tent and saw what must have been a pretty sorry sight. Hermione was sitting on her cot in her pajamas, hunched over a notebook and scribbling away, surrounded by papers that didn't leave her room to lie down. She wasn't even trying to manage her hair at this point, and it had morphed into more of a bird's nest than Harry's, and she looked pale and dazed when she looked up at him. "Merlin, Hermione, you look awful," George blurted out before he could stop himself. She looked down at herself.
"Yeah, probably,"
she said. He cocked an eyebrow. "What, no Snarky come back? No hexing your boyfriend for saying you look like hell?" She shrugged indifferently.
"I have more important things to be worrying about."
"Sure, but that's no excuse for not taking care of yourself." He sat across from her on Jenny's cot. "I'm not joking when I say you look pretty rough right now. Did you sleep at all last night?"
"Not really. I might have dozed off a bit, but I've been working all night."
Sensory overload did wonders for keeping her awake. It was when she took the diadem off that she tended to pass out, which was less and less lately.
"Hermione, that's the third time this week." It's a relative thing. I'm getting by."
"You don't look like it. Bloody hell, I'm not sure when the last time you even stepped outside the tent was." Hermione opened her mouth. "Other than to visit the loo," he cut her off. "I think it was when you had your freak out yesterday, and before that was 2 days earlier when you went to see Fleur." She looked up.
"You've been keeping track?"
she said in genuine surprise. "Someone has to. You haven't been eating with us. Dobby's getting pretty upset that you won't touch his cooking." She gave that indifferent shrug again.
"Manna is easier."
George sighed. "Are you at least eating enough?"
"Yes, of course. I think."
She trailed off, flexing her diadem-assisted memory to things she wasn't paying attention to lately.
"Okay, I missed lunch yesterday with the whole Grey Goo thing."
"And?" he demanded.
"And when I went to Shell Cottage."
She'd meant to stay for lunch and offer some manna in return, but the meeting hadn't gone as well as she'd hoped, and she'd forgotten. "Right. And when was the last time you even tasted anything but manna?" She just shrugged, not even bothering to think back. "Hermione, will you take that thing off?" George said. By now, she knew better than to resist until he took the diadem off for her. Bracing herself, she reached up and slid it off her head. The first moment always felt like she was about to pass out. The diadem bombarded her with every sight, sound, and sensation around her all the time. It was why she spent so much time closed off in the tent while she wore it. With it gone, it was like being plunged into pitch darkness until she adjusted. The loss of the perfect recall it gave her made her feel like she was in a fog, half asleep. It almost hurt, coming down from that high, but once she adjusted back to normal perceptions, it was like falling into blessed peace and quiet. Sometimes she really did pass out from weariness as soon as it was gone. Right now, though, she had something else to focus on. "This isn't healthy, Hermione," George said.
"You think I don't know this isn't healthy?"
she shouted all at once, surprising herself as much as him. George flinched back in shock. The diadem didn't suppress her emotions, far from it, but it took such concentration to stay focused while she was wearing it the way she constantly felt like she was on the edge of a meltdown of curling up and crying in the corner from the sheer force of it, that when she finally let go, she lost it.
"You think I don't know I'm a complete wreck right now, George?" she shouted.
Harry and Ginny could probably hear, but she didn't care.
"You think I don't know I'm not sleeping enough, not taking care of myself? You know I've overworked myself before. You've seen what it's like. You know I know the signs."
"Then take a break," he said. "Take a nap."
"I can't!"
"Of course you can."
"No, I can't. I can't do it. I'll still be thinking about it. It'll all still be right here, and I'll only feel guilty for not working."
"You shouldn't feel guilty for taking care of yourself, Hermione."
"I can't help it. I just need to finish this ritual. Then I can rest. I'm so close, George. I've almost got it figured out. I could have had it done in half the time if I could just concentrate properly."
George laughed uncomfortably. "Do you hear yourself? That's because you're so tired. You know you work better when you get enough sleep."
"But I can't help it!" she cried. "I just feel so awful about myself when I spend a whole day and barely even get to the problem, that I stay up late trying to make some progress, and then I fall asleep when I don't want to, and when I wake up I'm only angry at myself for sleeping longer than I'd planned."
"It's still not long enough," he pointed out.
"Not the point,"
she groused. I think it is. You're making this harder for yourself. And more important, you're making yourself miserable. You're hurting yourself, and I hate to see you like this."
"You think you need to tell me all this?" Hermione screamed. "I hate my life! I hate myself, because all I have to do is this damn Horcrux problem, and I can't focus on it long enough to make any progress. I've closed myself off so much it's practically all I have left, and I can barely get anything done with it on a good day. I've been beating my head against a wall for day after day, week after week, trying to solve it. And now I'm finally getting somewhere, and I don't want to lose it. I'm afraid if I stop, I'll just collapse into uselessness again."
George took her hands in his. "You're not useless, Hermione," he said. "Trust me, the last thing you are is useless, and you're only making it worse by running yourself into the ground." She slapped his hands away.
"Yeah, I know I'm running myself into the ground. I know I'm ruining my health. It doesn't matter. I just want this damn war to be over so I can rest for once. So I can stop and relax and have what little fun I can get out here without feeling guilty for not doing more. I hate it. I hate all of it. I hate it so much I want to burn all my notes, but I can't because I need them. I hate it so much I want to scream until I'm hoarse, but I can't because I couldn't stand the way you'd all worry over me if I did."
"And wouldn't you want us to worry over you?" George cut in. He looked hurt. He added more softly, "Wouldn't you want me to worry over you?"
I can't," she stammered. It'd just feel so uncomfortable because you'd be pressing me on all the problems I've brought on myself, and the attention would just make me feel worse."
The irony of where she was sitting right now was lost on her at this point.
"I didn't say it was rational, but I can't help that either. Plus, it'd be such a distraction. You'd all be worrying about me when all I'd want to do is get back to work."
He frowned. "Didn't you just say you wanted to take a break? Are you okay?"
"What I want? Ha!"
Hermione gave a strangled laugh.
What I really want is to run away to Australia with my parents and spend an entire year not doing anything. Just make it one long holiday. And then I want to spend a nice, quiet life writing spell books and making jewelry, and never have to worry about this hellhole again."
"And what am I, chopped liver?" George demanded, but he instantly regretted it. Not the question, but being so harsh with Hermione when she was having what might be the worst breakdown he'd ever seen her go through. But she held it together for that one.
"Of course I want you there with me, George," she said. "That should go without saying. But the problem is I can't do all of those things because I have to keep going here because I'm the only person who can save Harry's life and end this stupid thing. And I feel like I'm killing myself doing it. I've lost all sense of what time it is. I've lost all sense of what day it is. I'm running on caffeine non-stop. I can't remember the last time I so much as slept with the lights off, let alone a full night. I'm doing good just to eat 3 blocks of manna and change my clothes once in a while. I'm spending practically 24/7 sitting in a tiny tent trying to work on this, and it's never ever fast enough because people are dying every day out there, and I'm scared I'm not smart enough to stop it."
She stopped, staring at George, with tears running down her cheeks. Utter silence filled the tent. Even from outside, there was nothing. If Harry and Ginny were nearby, they weren't moving. She could imagine their horror-struck faces staring at the tent. She wasn't even fully aware of when George pulled her into his arms, but she wrapped her arms as tight as she could around him, sobbing into his shirt. He didn't say anything, but just listened as he rubbed her back.
"I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm scared I can't do it. I'm scared I'm going to come up just short and Harry's going to die. The way I've been lately, I'm scared I don't even have what it takes to get by in normal life sometimes. There are days I can't understand how I ever got through my classes with the workload they had when I can't get anything done now. I'm scared I'm not cut out for the life I've dreamed of since I was 11.
George held Hermione and rubbed her back for a while until she began to relax and her sobs nearly stopped. "Hermione Granger," he said, "you are the furthest thing from not being cut out for real life. I am certain that once you're rested and in your right mind again, you'll have no trouble doing anything you want to do. And even if you can't, I'll still love you, because even with what you've done so far, what you can do now, you're already the most amazing girl I've ever met. You're brilliant, fun, and too giving for your own good right now. And you don't ever need to worry about not getting by. With the jewelry thing, you'll at least be able to support yourself. Not that I couldn't take care of you either with the shop." Hermione sniffed and shook her head against him.
"I'm a terrible girlfriend," she muttered.
"You are not," George insisted. "You're going through a hard time, and you need someone to take care of you. I'm sure there'll be times when I need you to take care of me too, but right now just worry about yourself." She looked up at him and blushed. He took it in stride. "So here's what we're going to do. You're going to stop working for the day."
"What?"
she gasped. "You heard me."
"But I—"
"No buts." He flicked his wand, and all of her papers lifted up and organized themselves into a neat pile out of her reach. "You're done for today. No books, no quills, or pens, or whatever you use."
"I need those."
"No, you don't. I say no pens, at all. If you absolutely have to write something down, you'll dictate it to me."
"George, that's ridiculous."
"Don't tempt me, Hermione," he teased. "I can be a lot more ridiculous than that. Tonight you're going to have a nice dinner with us. Of real food. I don't care if it's just rabbit stew. It'll probably taste like filet mignon the way you've been eating. Then you're going to take a long hot bath."
"We don't have a bathtub."
"We'll transfigure one for you," he grinned. "You won't have to do a thing." Hermione turned beet red, mortified at the thought of him involving Harry and Ginny in this. "You're going to take a long hot bath," he repeated, "and you're going to go to bed early, with no alarm charm. I'm not letting you start up again until you take care of yourself properly, and you can't feel guilty about it because I'm making you do it." Still blushing deeply, Hermione protested one more time.
"But I really am almost done."
"Nice try. I've been listening to you. You've been stuck for 2 days. I bet it'll hit you right away after a good night's sleep, and you'll wish you'd tried it days ago." Day 48. George was just annoyingly good sometimes. Hermione could tell she wouldn't be able to argue with George. In fact, part of her loved him all the more for taking care of her like this, but that part was mostly buried under layers of frustration and embarrassment. It didn't help that he was totally right. The rabbit stew didn't taste like filet mignon, but it did taste uncommonly good. It tasted like the most savory thing she'd eaten in a long time, because it literally was. It was awkward, though. Harry didn't seem to know what to say to her, and Ginny looked rather uncomfortable, but it was still good to eat with her friends. The bath, to her surprise, worked perfectly. She was able to relax enough to stop thinking about Horcruxes for a while, and she felt cleaner than she had in a long time, even though she'd been using cleaning charms on herself regularly. and with the lights off, she fell asleep on her cot almost the moment her head hit the pillow. And it was glorious. By the time she woke up, it was already late morning, and she'd slept for 14 hours. It wasn't quite as bad as that time during the Triwizard Tournament, but it was close, and it was a lot longer in coming. George was there to greet her when she came out of the tent, feeling calmer and more rested than she could remember feeling in a long time, certainly since before Malfoy Manor. "Morning, Hermione," he said with a carefree grin. "Feeling better?"
"Yes, much better," she said. "You were right, George. I needed a break."
"Good." He held her by the shoulders and gazed longingly into her eyes. "I love you, you know that?"
"Yes, I love you too," she said.
George smiled wider and leaned in to kiss her. She held up a finger between them and stopped him. He raised his eyebrows in confusion.
"Of course, true love's kiss,"
she said. "Come again?"
"That's the missing element. What I need to finish the ritual, true love's kiss. Where are my notes?"
George ran into his and Harry's tent and grabbed a stack of papers. "Here, but what are you talking about?" Hermione frantically flipped through the pages that were now totally out of her organization until she found what she was looking for.
"Look here," she said. "One of the elements of the Horcrux ritual is the kiss of death, invoking the life-stealing power of the Dementor and kissing the victim's still warm lips. I should have seen this before. The opposing element to the kiss of death is true love's kiss. The counter to death isn't giving life, it's showing love. Oh, I'm such an idiot. Isn't that the answer to break a curse in 100 Muggle fairy stories? I mean, more in the modern tellings, but still."
Harry stared at her. He looked torn between "I told you so" and "What the hell?" Finally he settled on "So snogging is part of the ritual?"
"It's obvious when you look for it," she rambled on. "Dumbledore said one of the deepest mysteries of magic is how perfectly mundane and sometimes small acts can have powerful magical consequences, like Harry's mum giving her life for him, or saving a life, or even sparing a life. And what's the most powerful form of magic?"
"Love, Dumbledore would say."
"And so would the Unspeakables. It's not just sentimentality. True love's kiss is incredibly powerful in ritual terms. It completes the equation perfectly."
"So you solved it?" he said. Hermione couldn't speak for a moment. She almost said, "I solved it," but what came out was,
"I need to talk to Ginny."
She ran before George could respond, and soon found Ginny looking for early berries near the camp.
"Ginny!"
she called, and the younger girl stopped and looked at her.
"Hermione, what—" "Ginny, I'm going to ask you a question. Don't think, just answer yes or no. Do you love Harry?"
"Yes." Ginny blurted the word out seemingly before she realized what the question was, from how her eyes widened when she said it. But she stood by it.
"Yes, I do. Why?" "True love's kiss?" "Huh? That's the missing element in the ritual."
Ginny's eyes grew wide.
"You solved it?"
Tears welled in Hermione's eyes.
"I solved it!"
Ginny stared for a moment, her mouth hanging slightly open.
"Wait, I only have to kiss him?" she said. "You have to kiss him in the runic circle in the middle of a complex and rather dangerous ritual. And it has to be true love. If it's not true love—"
She trailed off, not wanting to think about what all the consequences could be.
"Well, the best case scenario is it won't work. Anyway, true love's kiss, a lot of complicated arithmancy, love is the most powerful form of magic. QED."
George finally caught up with them. "Merlin's beard," he said. "I'm happy for you, Hermione, but do you have to run off like a cat after a pixie every time you have a life-altering revelation?" She sighed.
"Sorry, George, I just get so excited. And this was so simple, I just needed to think outside the box a little. You know, Ravenclaw's diadem is an incredible tool, but it gives you tunnel vision."
George rolled his eyes. "And the fact that you got your first proper night's sleep in weeks had nothing to do with it," he teased.
"I love you,"
Hermione told him, and she kissed him. Properly this time. Day 49. And the Lord said to Moses, Make a fiery serpent, and set it on a pole, and everyone who is bitten, when he sees it, shall live." Fitting. The adder hissed as Hermione lifted it up, bound around a tree branch. It was a compelling image, and it wasn't limited to the Bible. It was also the rod of Asclepius, another symbol for healing in a completely different culture. So she took it and ran with it, incorporating it into the ritual for that extra boost.
"Do you all know your parts?"
she asked. Harry, Ginny, and George all nodded. Harry looked the most nervous of them.
"Okay, once I start it, we have to see it through," she warned them.
Still holding up the adder, she stepped into the outer circle and uttered,
"Legate scripta."
The generic incantation to begin a ritual activated the 3 circles of runes that they had laid out together. Curtains of light shimmered into existence around them, light that carried a dangerous charge and promised doom to anyone who crossed it. Staying still, Hermione spoke.
"With the serpent lifted up, we draw out the corruption, as poison is drawn from the wound."
The adder hissed and writhed against its bindings, and a red cord of light lanced out from it and connected with Harry's chest. As she'd warned him, he didn't move or speak. With that, she drove the stake into the ground. When she was sure it wouldn't fall, she moved carefully between the outer 2 circles to take her place. Hermione, Ginny, George, and the adder were standing at the corners of a polygon with 14 sides and 14 feet in diameter, with Harry at the center. She'd strongly considered using an octagon instead and forming a peace sign, but she'd decided on the traditional form. Ginny and the adder were directly opposite each other, while Hermione and George were slightly to Ginny's side, not quite at right angles, so that George wouldn't be directly behind Harry when she cast the final spell. Once she was in place, Hermione motioned to George, who drew his wand and cast Expecto Patronum. Despite his identity as the raccoon on the wireless, that wasn't George's Patronus form. It wasn't a fox either. By happy accident, Fred's Patronus was a fox, but George's was the golden jackal. The jackal burst forth from his wand and frolicked around him, not seeing any dark spirits to attack, but then he said, "With the power of a spirit guardian, we divide light from darkness." The Patronus flew up to hover above Harry's head, and a white cord connected down to him. At that point, a dark cloud formed around his head, sharpest at his scar, but not exactly emerging from it. It was pushed back towards the snake. Harry groaned in pain, but as long as he didn't speak any proper words, and probably even if he did at this point, he would be okay. Hermione motioned to Ginny, and she stepped into the inner circle, a silver goblet in her hands.
"With the milk of human kindness, we divide life from death," she said.
She handed the goblet to Harry, and he drank it. A pale aura formed around him, and the black mass was pushed further behind him. He shouted louder from the pain. He dropped the goblet, but its purpose was served. Hermione took him by both hands and leaned forward, speaking a second time.
"With true love's kiss, we divide love from hate."
She kissed Harry on the lips, tenderly, then pulled back. Still holding him by the hands, she held him at arm's length. A golden cord connected their hearts. A scarlet aura flecked with gold appeared around Harry and was pulled forward along that golden cord. His soul was being separated from the Horcrux. An ugly cord of black and green connected them, stretched taut by the powerful magic coursing through the circle as the Horcrux tried to keep its hold. That was Hermione's cue. She took aim at that dark cord with her red oak wand and chanted the final spell 3 times.
"Sekbalome nume akatharan! Sekbalome nume akatharan! Sekbalome nume akatharan!"
A disembodied scream sounded throughout the clearing, like the unholy shriek of a demon. Fire of mingled gold, white, and red tore into the black cord, trying to sever the Horcrux from Harry. But the Horcrux began to fight back. A darker blood-red bloomed within it, and it surged forward, back towards Harry, pushing through the fire and forcing it back. Hermione felt the backlash like fire racing up her wand arm and screamed in pain. Ginny and George must have felt it too from how they screamed as well. But she pressed on.
"Sekbalome nume akatharan!"
The fire surged back, pushing the Horcrux away again. But not for long. It came back for another attack.
"What's happening?"
Ginny yelled. This far into the ritual, it didn't matter if they spoke.
"It's fighting back," Hermione said. "Ginny, kiss him again. We need to force it away."
Ginny pulled Harry close and kissed him hard, and Hermione chanted again.
"Sec bellome nume acatharon! Sec bellome nume acatharon!"
"Sec bellome nume acatharon," George said, followed by a repeat of "Expecto Patronum," trying to find a way to strengthen his own part. The fire ate into the cord connecting the Horcrux to Harry. The serpent pulled at it. It nearly snapped, but then the Horcrux seemed to burn with a dark fire and barreled forward, slamming into Harry nearly hard enough to knock him over. Ginny was pushed back, nearly losing her grip on him. Harry's eyes flashed red, and then... bang! The blast knocked Hermione, Ginny, and George clean off their feet and burnt out the runes. The curtains of light flared and vanished, and the three of them landed on their backs. Hermione groaned and pushed herself up on her elbows. She saw Ginny and George struggling to get up, and Harry down on his knees, still in the middle of the circle. He was groaning with his fists pressed against his head.
"What happened?"
Ginny said.
"Was the kiss not enough?" "No, it was too strong," she said. "The Horcrux was too strong. I thought it wouldn't have enough will to fight back. It was only a fragment and weakened by Lily's protection, but—"
Harry started screaming. "No, no, stop! Get out of my head!" He looked up at them, and they saw his face twist between terror and hatred, as his eyes flickered between emerald green and blood red.